Every day, you use the zip code without giving it a second thought, whether you're shopping online, looking up a nearby store, or filling out a simple form. It's just 5 digits, right? Harmless, straightforward, and purely functional. But what if I told you those 5 numbers are quietly shaping major decisions about your life? From deciding where grocery stores open, to determining how much you pay for insurance, even influencing health outcomes and home value, zip codes are powerful tools for decision making. But here's the twist, they were never meant for this. When zip codes were introduced in the 1960s, they had one job: to make mail delivery faster and more efficient. They were never designed to define neighborhoods, measure inequality, or determine access to critical services. And yet we've turned them into a shorthand for how we understand communities, often with surprising and even harmful consequences. So what's the real story behind zip codes? How do we get here? And more importantly, what can we do to avoid their pitfalls? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll learn how these 5 digits are shaping your world and why it's time for a better approach to analyzing the spaces we live in. Before zip codes, delivering mail was a slower and less organized process. Postal zones, which were introduced in the 1940s, were a small step towards improvement, but they only worked within major cities. As mail volume exploded in the mid-20th century, the need for a more efficient system became clear. Enter the zip code. In 1963, the United States Postal Service introduced the Zone Improvement Plan, better known as the zip code. These 5 digits revolutionized mail delivery, breaking down the country into smaller, manageable units based on postal routes. Here's how the whole thing works.
The heart of the system is a number. The first number represents one of these sections. The next 2 numbers narrow it down. And the last 2 numbers, they indicate the final stop before delivery.
It's a really great system when you want to deliver mail. The Postal Service even introduced Mr. Zip.
This is Mr. Zip,
a lovable character to encourage adoption of the new system. Zip codes quickly became the standard part of addresses across the country. But here's the thing, zip codes were never meant to define neighborhoods, demographic groups, or anything beyond delivery routes. They were created to optimize logistics, not to represent geographic or social realities. In fact, zip codes don't even align with geographic areas, they're just a collection of delivery routes. Some zip codes aren't even tied to physical space, like those assigned to military mail or large institutions, or these which are single buildings inside of Manhattan which occupy their own zip code. And that's where the problem begins. Over time, zip codes became a convenient shorthand for grouping people and places. But when we use them to make decisions about healthcare, housing, and public services, we risk basing critical choices on an arbitrary and outdated system. So how did this system, which was designed for sorting letters, end up shaping so many aspects of our lives? So to understand that in more detail, let's take a look at this zip code in Dallas, Texas, 75206. The census lists a median household income in this zip code of $63,392. But when we zoom in, we can see that the incomes within this single zip code range from $9,700 to $227,000. That's a massive disparity, and it's hidden when we rely on zip codes as a single unit of analysis. Now, when you compare that to census blocks or tracts, which is what I'm using here, you can get a much finer level of detail. These smaller units reveal patterns that zip codes simply can't show. And when we're talking about critical decisions like where to build a hospital or how to allocate resources, details matter. In public health, education, and even disaster response, relying on zip codes can lead to misallocated resources. For example, using zip codes to distribute disaster relief funds might leave some areas underserved simply because their needs are hidden by arbitrary boundaries. The Flint Water Crisis is one of the most devastating examples of how misusing zip codes in data analysis can lead to harmful outcomes. In 2014, when the city of Flint switched its water supply, lead contamination spread through the system, creating a public health emergency. Officials were tasked with analyzing blood lead levels to understand the scale of the crisis, but instead of using the city's water system boundaries or other census boundaries, they relied on zip codes to group and analyze the data. But here's the problem, Flint's water system and its zip codes don't align. In fact, Flint's zip codes cover parts of 8 different municipalities. And by using zip codes as their unit of analysis, the true extent of the contamination was obscured. Families outside the city limits who shared Flint's water supply were left out of the analysis, and the severity of the crisis within Flint was diluted. The choice to use zip codes masked critical patterns in the data. And the result, delays in identifying affected areas, which prolonged the crisis and worsened its impact. Now, when it comes to housing, zip codes have an outsized influence. Retailers, appraisers, and even mortgage lenders use zip codes as shorthand for property values. But here's the problem, zip codes can hide the full story once again. So to illustrate this, I found a data set of home sales in Seattle, Washington that goes back to 1999 and has about 500,000 different transactions recorded. This data set has some helpful information, such as the sale price, exact location of the home, and some information information about if the home has views to many of Seattle's scenic sites like Mount Rainier, Lake Washington, and others. Now, I did some analysis on the data, and of course, some of the things that are correlated to home price are exactly what you'd expect. Things like the land value, improvement value, and number of beds and bathrooms are all strong indicators of the final home sale price. But when you look at the zip code the home is located in, compared to some of the other features of the property, such as the views, this is where things start to get a little interesting. The zip code where the home is located has a similar correlation to views of the Cascade Mountains, the Puget Sound, and even a stronger correlation to the final sales price as a view of Mount Rainier. Somehow your zip code your home is located in is a stronger indicator of your sale price than a view of this. And interestingly enough, the lot size where your home is sitting is an equal correlation to the sales price as the zip code. Now, not to overstate this, the correlation here isn't strong by any means, so we can't take this as a heavy indicator of the final sales price, but generally location is incredibly important. We can measure the impact of location by finding the average of the 10 nearest homes sold to the target home, which has a correlation of 0.65 compared to a correlation of 0.47 for the average home price in the zip code. It's hard to draw conclusions from this one data set, but the fact that we can see some statistical trends here helps to illustrate the impact of this boundary in our daily lives. Now, the good news is there are better options. By using finer spatial resolutions like census tracts or block groups, we can uncover patterns that zip codes can't. These smaller units allow us to identify health disparities and more accurately allocate resources more effectively. But first, let's talk about using real addresses. When you use an address in your spatial data, you get or can get the precise latitude and longitude coordinates of that location. This allows us to map and analyze data with pinpoint accuracy, eliminating the broad generalizations that come with zip codes. If you don't have access to that data, you can use census units like tracts or block groups. These units provide a finer level of granularity and are specifically designed to represent communities more accurately than zip codes. For example, census tracts are often used in public health and urban planning to identify trends and allocate resources. Another powerful tool is spatial indexing. Systems like the H3 grid system, a global spatial indexing system, divide the world into evenly sized grid cells. These grids are consistent, scalable, and free from the irregularities that plague zip codes. They're especially useful for analyzing large data sets like traffic patterns or climate data when precision and uniformity are critical to the analysis you're performing. So we started this journey with a simple question. Can we trust zip codes to tell us the truth about our world? And to me, the answer is clear. While they served us well for sorting mail, their role in data analysis is fraught with limitations. So next time you see a zip code, remember, it's just the beginning of the story. The real insights lie in the details.
Now that's easy to say, and it sounds just fine, but let's put this question right on the line. What is the zip code? A postal quirk? What does it do? How does it work? If you'll lend an ear, we'll be glad to explain how the zip code eases your postal pain.